I love hi-hats. I don't know about you guys, man, but I love hi-hats. I think your hats are one of the most critical elements to your signature sound. And when I'm shopping for a pair of hats, man, like I don't take it too lightly. I spend a lot of time searching for the perfect pair of hats. Now, there's a lot of things that sort of determine how hats sound. There's a lot of things according to the physical makeup, the lathing, the hammering, the size, the finish, like all of that stuff plays a part in how your hi-hats end up sounding. So, it's good to know this kind of stuff to a point, but at the end of the day, man, it all comes down to what your ears like. So when you're shopping for a pair of hats, shop with your ears. Don't worry about the specs or any of that kind of stuff. Put a couple of sticks on it and hit it for a few minutes. And if you like them, buy them. So this is just a short guide to hi-hat shopping. Just going to give you a little bit of information that you can take into the music store so that you know what or where to look, what type of hats to look at before you start trying them out with a pair of sticks. And it'll just kind of help you to figure out what kind of hats would fit best for the style of music that I'm playing. Now, the first and most obvious factor that's going to determine the sound of a pair of hats is the size. 14-inch hats for a long time has been the most common. Then 15s, 13s, and there's 12s, and there's also 10s. 12s and 10s tend to lean a little bit more towards, like a pair of side hats or something. If you want a cool pair of contrasting hats to your regular ones, 10s or 12s are really cool because they're kind of, you can keep them shut, play them open. They just kind of add a nice little color to your kit. But 13s, 14s, and 15s these days are the most common. I tend to lean more towards 15s. I fell in love with 15-inch hats a couple years ago, and I haven't turned back. I just love 15-inch hats. I like the real estate sitting there, and I like how they sound, especially when you get the right recipe of 15s. Great. So the most obvious effect that the size will have on a pair of hats is the pitch. Obviously, the smaller you go, the higher the pitch, and then the larger you go, the lower the pitch. So, 14s are kind of been the standard for the longest time. You might want to start there. Maybe try some 13s as well. 13-inch hats were really popular in the gospel circuit for a long time. Just because you get that little extra bit of clarity because they're a little bit smaller. So your chick on the top of the hats is a little more pronounced. The most important aspect to a pair of hi-hats and the way they sound is the recipe in terms of weight. Okay, there's a top hat and there's a bottom hat. So depending on the weight of each one of these two hats, that's really going to determine what those hats sound like. So in terms of weight, we're talking it goes from thin, medium, medium heavy, and heavy. So depending on the combination of the two, that's really going to have a large effect on how these hats sound in terms of pitch and clarity and wash, stick definition. All of that kind of stuff is going to be affected by the weight of those two hats. The weight will also obviously affect volume. So if you're a hard rock player, like a metal player or something, you're obviously going to want something that's heavy on both ends. You want a heavy top and a heavy bottom because you're going to be smacking at these things. You got to cut over a whole bunch of guitars. You're going to want two heavy cymbals that make up your hi-hats. On the opposite end of the spectrum, if you're playing a lot of bebop jazz, swing jazz, stuff like that, a lot of jazz flavored hi-hats are thinner. So they have a thin top, relatively thin top, and also a thin bottom. So I guess the heaviest you might see on a pair of hats like that would be a medium, somewhere around there. Maybe leaning towards a medium heavy, but for the most part, It's a relatively thin top and a medium bottom. And the finish for these hats are normally just a traditional, either dry, like unlaid, unfinished, or a traditional type hat on the top. Thin hats are a little bit more hollow sounding, and you'll know what I mean when you try something. That's the best way I can describe it. It's just kind of hollow and kind of thin sounding. You don't get a ton of volume. I guess maybe the whole idea behind that is that, you know, a lot of these jazz clubs, small rooms, you don't want something that's going to project too much. So they make those hats a little bit thinner and washier to fit with the larger, sort of drier cymbals on the rest of a jazz kit. So if you're looking for a good set of hats for jazz, you're probably going to lean a little bit more towards traditional finish, maybe a little bit larger and thin top and bottom. Now, in terms of finding a really nice sort of all-purpose, do-anything pair of hi-hats, you know, if you're a session type drummer, you're playing with a bunch of different people and you have one pair of hats to carry around, there's a lot to choose from in that field. Most of the hats you're going to see are going to be sort of a medium to medium heavy top, heavy to extra heavy bottom, and you'll be able to get a lot out of a pair of hats like this. They're super versatile. They'll fit in almost any situation. It's really only the extreme sides where you're going to be starting to get really specific as far as light jazz playing or super heavy rock playing. Most of the stuff that's in between, it's kind of pretty versatile. So it's really all going to depend on what your ears like and how you like them to sound when you're actually playing them. But as you start to get more experience playing a whole bunch of different hats in music stores and on gigs and playing your friends' kits and all this kind of stuff, you'll start to learn what different elements you like in a pair of hats. And you know, when it finally comes down to picking a pair for yourself that you're going to stick with, you'll have that personal recipe that you like. So that's just a quick little guide on shopping for hi-hats, whether you're moving from your first set to an intermediate set or whether you're going from an intermediate set to high end. You're obviously going to have a lot more options to choose from as things get more expensive, right? So as you start moving towards the higher end, there'll be a lot more options in terms of finish and size and all that stuff. Don't forget to, obviously, to go to the websites and you know, check out their sound pages if they have them. Most of them have them. And you can at least hear what these different hats sound like. And you know, if you happen to see a pair in a store that you're digging, sit down and play them. You know, like I said, ultimately that's all that matters. Thanks for watching. Leave a comment below, man. Let me know what kind of hats you're playing. Don't forget to leave your flag emoji at the end of your comment. Let me know where you're watching from. Like, subscribe. See you next video.